All right, let's jump into some more questions. I'm sure someone already mentioned this, but in case they didn't, I was struck by the Daryl Dixon trailer, and that was especially because of the music. A classical piece, one of my favorites, Claire de Lune. I find it pretty interesting that they chose to put it in the trailer, yet we do not hear it throughout the spin-off. Of course, that's not unusual at all in movies/shows, but I honestly kind of expected to hear it. As the vast majority of classical musical pieces, or music in general, there is a coda, or even more than one towards the end. I honestly wasn't surprised they chose it for this spin-off, in particular since it's in France, so pretty obvious. But the coda, and obviously the meaning of the name Moonlight, just make me think also Moonlight could be interpreted as both the drink and also the scene towards the end of Still, since they have their drunk conversation under the moonlight. I think it's one of the most obvious hints for people that are not TDers or don't even know the existence of this specific branch of the fandom, especially if they watch the first seasons of the show. Sorry if anyone already mentioned this. No, I honestly don't think that we really talked about this enough. I know that we talked about it a little bit, and I don't even know how much I mentioned it, but I remember having conversations about it. So, kind of a funny story. I was telling my brother about this, and then this was back before Daryl Dixon aired, and when the trailer came out, I was super excited for it, and I was telling him about it, and I told him that they had Claire de Lune in it, and it's really interesting because it is the piano, and especially at the beginning when it shows Daryl on the overturned boat, just kind of washing up on the shore, you just get the piano chords, But then as it goes on, they get the whole orchestra going in it, so it's a really beautiful version of Claire de Lune, and it's very epic sounding, very sweeping, And I remember my brother, at first, he didn't know what it was. He was going, wait a minute, which song is that? And I was like, come here, let me just show you the trailer. And so we did. And as soon as he heard it, he was like, oh, yeah. And I was like, yeah, I knew you would know what it is. Everybody's heard Claire de Lune. Anyway, but I think we just talked about it in a really basic way. I remember thinking that we talked about that there is a coda in Claire de Lune, and just the fact that it's music, that they're, using a classical piece of music. And so much of the show had musical hints in it. So it wasn't like a musical with Daryl and Isabel singing all of their lines or anything, but we had that bit where he came up out of the water and observed a married couple and then someone playing the cello, which that was another really famous piece of music. So they used a lot of classical music in the show and musical references in the show. And just the fact that they're doing that is a huge hint toward Beth. So we've talked about this in a very general sort of way. But, I don't think we've talked about it enough, the fact that it means moonlight. And actually, when I hear moonlight, what I think that means, I do think it's a Beth symbol, but I almost think of it more as like a wolf symbol because of the moon. And, but you're right. Moonshine, the fact that they were under the moon. I don't know if you guys remember this, but back in season 4, it was actually not directly around Beth and Daryl, but it was when Michonne and Carl were looking through those other houses while Rick was resting, and then that ended up not going so well because the claimers showed up. But they were looking through this house and they were looking at all these photos, and one of them, like, for example, looked like Lizzie or a little bit like Mary at Terminus and had blood all over it. And so they were obviously using the pictures as foreshadows, but one of them was a dog staring up at the moon. So we had, that was a Sirius symbol, and then you have this big bright moon in the sky. So there's also all the parallels between Beth and Beta, or anti-parallels, and he was called Half Moon. And so we just have a lot of this. So the fact that they would use something called Moonlight for the trailer, I definitely think it's suspicious, and that they were hinting at things. So I decided to do a little bit of research on Claire de Lune, and literally this is just like 10 minutes of research, guys, nothing super deep. But I just started reading about it, and here's a couple of the other things I found. For one thing, it was something that was written much earlier. And I don't know if I can say his name correctly. Debussy, maybe, is the composer. And so first of all, it's part of a whole. It is one movement in a whole suite of songs. And so that's kind of interesting. Part of a whole just fits. I mean, you could say that about any classical piece of music, I suppose, but just one branch of the whole TWD universe, right? And it says that it was written early in his career, and then he didn't really want to publish it because it didn't fit his later, more mature style that he had adopted. But somebody made him an offer, and then he did end up publishing it, and that became the most famous piece he ever wrote. So anyway, it's just kind of interesting that originally it came from an earlier iteration of his writings, you it just feels like Claire de Lune in a lot of ways is a throwback to earlier times or earlier years. It was originally called Promenade Sentimentale, which means, it kind of just means a sentimental stroll, or like maybe a stroll in the moonlight. And then he just changed it to Moonlight. It is the third movement in the suite. So there's a 3 associated with it. So all of these could be why they used it, right? So yeah, that's really fun. And I'm glad that you pointed that out. And, for one, I for one love the music that they use in the trailer. And I thought it made the trailer way more epic, and it made me just super, super excited to see it. So I hope they come out with another cool trailer like that. That's really lovely. And yeah, I definitely think that it is a hint toward Beth, and that he is, let's put it this way. If he's walking in the moonlight, what is he walking toward? And there was a lot of wolf symbolism, both in the foreshadow of this in Diverged and also in the show itself. Remember when he got to that school, the young woman who had all kinds of Beth traits that was taking care of all those kids, all kinds of wolf symbolism in there. So anyway, I don't have a whole lot more to say about that, but I 100% agree with you. And yeah, that's fun to kind of revisit. So thank you. Is there symbolic significance to people losing limbs? Rick losing his hand, Aaron and Lydia losing an arm, Herschel losing part of his leg. I'm sure, absolutely certain there is, and we can conjecture about what it is, but I don't know that I've hit specifically on what they mean for particular limbs, because they're so specific about things. I don't think, if you were to say that loss of limb in general means something, it probably means loss, sacrificing something in this world where not very many people remain whole. It's like, if you're part of this world and you're still alive, you're going to have scars, and you're going to have lost something, whether it's people or something physical. So it could just be a general symbol of loss or of self-sacrifice in a lot of ways, I think. But I think that there are also more specific symbolisms to losing a hand versus losing a leg versus losing something else like an eye. We kind of know what the eye symbolism is. So I'm not sure exactly what losing the hand or arm symbolizes. There's been lots and lots of theories. The leg, I would assume, means maybe a loss of some mobility, some sort of like a loss of transportation in a way, making you kind of crippled and unable to, because at that point, you remember that line from season 4, and I remember it mostly because it was in the trailer where Daryl's actually, talking to Herschel, and he says, when we get out there, at some point we always have to run. And so if you don't have your leg, like Herschel, at that point he was like, okay, I can't go with you, I'll draw you a map. So it could be something like that. With the arm, what I will point out is that they foreshadowed Rick losing his arm, and then he did lose his arm. And the other thing that it makes me think of is, remember that Negan was going to make him cut off Carl's arm, and that's when Rick really had a freak out. He really had a meltdown over that. And Carl wouldn't necessarily have died from that. He certainly could have. But if they had, caught it in time, made sure it didn't get infected and all of that, then it probably wouldn't have been a mortal wound. But there's something about that I think it represents more than just the loss of the limb. I think it represents maybe losing one's faith or something like that. I don't know. It's a really interesting question. But Aaron and Lydia, you're right, both lost an arm. And I don't know if we'll... I'm kind of assuming we'll see everyone who's still alive in Alexandria again, so it'll be interesting what they do with their characters, if anything. But yeah, it's a really good question. It's one I haven't thought about a whole lot, but I will try to think about it more moving forward. And if anyone else has any ideas, I would love to hear them. All right, next one. I read somewhere in a comment section under a Bethyl scene that Daryl started talking much less after her death, and now I literally can't stop thinking about it. Mind blown. She better come back so he can stop sounding like Batman. He's talked a lot more in recent seasons, like 10 and 11, and then the Daryl Dixon spinoff. But yeah, certainly in the seasons right after 6, 7, 8, he was definitely talking a lot less. And that was a big deal. That was something that we definitely noticed. And we definitely think it had a lot to do with his grief over Beth and how he was mourning her. And it's important that he started to talk a little bit more, at least, as time went on. Not because it means he got over it or anything, not in a negative way, but at the same time, he had to kind of pull himself out of his grief because he had people who needed him. He had to be able to talk in order to help take care of the kids. And certainly to connect with Isabel and Laurent and all of that. So I think they had him not talk for a big part of it to show how many years he was mourning for her so heavily that he just stopped talking in general, unless he absolutely had to. But then as we, get further on, again, it's not that he's like over it or anything like that, but it's just a matter of he was moving on with his life because he had to. And it just makes me think of Beth's line from season 4 when she says, the hurt doesn't go away, you just make room for it. And that's kind of what he was doing, I think. So, but definitely we want him to come back, and we want a lot more conversations between them. All right. April Robin. The thing that always gets me is the source of Emily's income. That's the one thing that always makes me think she's still under contract to AMC and affiliates. I worked in the music industry on the sales side for 28 years and was still there when she released her first album. I can guarantee she does not make enough money to support herself through her music endeavors and her live shows here and there. I personally know music artists that are around her popularity/caliber that are still doing service jobs to make ends meet. Super suspicious, but maybe she was just really smart about investing her original TWD money and convention appearance income. Follow the money and we'll have an answer, LOL. Yeah, I could see it either way. I will be the first to admit I am not all that much in the know about the music industry and how people get paid. So I totally believe you that so many music artists out there don't make a whole lot of money. But I will say that because she was on The Walking Dead, that automatically brings her a lot of fame from people who are loyal to her just because she was on the show and buy every album that she puts out. And yeah, like you said, maybe she's just really good at investing. Maybe she has her own side gigs that she's done with the money she made. I mean, we know, obviously, Norman's a millionaire anyway, but he has his own production company. He has like several side businesses that he's invested in with his money, and she might have done something like that too. We just don't really know, and that's kind of her personal thing, so... Lots of money, not much money. I could see it either way. The biggest thing to me is that she just hasn't had an acting job that wasn't from AMC or ABC since she left the show. And I think if she really, truly left and wasn't coming back, we would have seen her star in shows from different networks and different studios, and we haven't seen that. So, but I do appreciate that as a background. Like, that's really interesting. And like I said, I don't know that much about the music industry, so that's interesting to know. Thank you. Back in mid-2020, I had a dream of seeing Beth return on screen via trailer of a new spin-off. She was dressed in all-black armor with red stripes on the sleeves and her hair was down. Now we see this with Rick and his CRM armor uniform. I remember vividly the title in bold on the screen. It said, The Walking Dead, The Renegade. Well, that would be awesome. I would be all for that. Let's hope that your dream was prophetic and we do see something like that. That would be fun. And it would be very much in line with... what we saw in 509, which was very foreshadowing. So that's great. Thanks for sharing that with us. Hey, so I was making a Beth edit today and looking at her scenes in the show. It feels strange. I don't know if you feel the same way, but every time Beth is in a scene, especially in seasons 4 and 5, it feels like she's the main character. The way it's filmed, the slow motions, the badass shots, it's almost like a different show where she's the hero, and that makes her death even weirder. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably by design. Back, especially right after Coda, 5B and 6, a lot of what we talked about was the fact that she was the only one with her own storyline outside of the main storyline. So, of course, in 4B, everybody got separated, and you had all these little groups. You had, of course, Beth and Daryl, and then you had Rick and Carl, and Michonne joined them pretty quickly. And then you had Sasha, Tyrese, and... Maggie, and then you had, or not Tyrese, I'm sorry, Sasha, Bob, and Maggie, and then Tyrese and Carol, and all these little groups. But the thing is, they were all pretty much the same story because they were all heading toward Terminus, and it was going to be all of their storylines finally reintegrating there. And Beth is the only one that not only did not end up there, at least not that we saw, and had a completely different storyline outside of all the others. So I think that they did that on purpose, not only because they were going to be taking her away for a while and then bringing her back, but to show that she was going to have her own storyline away from the other characters. So the whole thing is like a synecdoche. It's a smaller storyline that represents a bigger one. So in season 5, we saw her having her own storyline with what we believe is kind of a subsidiary, if you will, of the CRM. And then eventually, I mean, even in season 5, she did reunite with Team Family. It was just only for a moment before she was shot. But in the grander scheme of the whole story over seasons and seasons, it was also representative that, like her being taken from Daryl at the funeral home, was a foreshadow of her being taken from Daryl in a much bigger way for a much longer amount of time. Okay, and during that time, she's going to be inside the CRM, which is a bigger, manifestation of what Grady was. And then eventually they will come back together again. So you see what I mean? And so I think that they did that on purpose and made, any scenes that she was in made it feel like she was the center of it, because they were trying to show that her arc was going to be very, very important. And of course, she's going to be the star of her own arc, but we just weren't going to see it for a while. I think we'll see it all in hindsight and in flashback. So yeah, I don't think that you're imagining that at all. I think that 100% was done on purpose, that Gimple did that on purpose. And yeah, like you said, that's all the more reason that them, quote unquote, killing her off is a load of crap. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. That's a really interesting way to describe it, but I totally understand what you mean, and I think that really is a thing. So yeah, for sure. All right, let's stop there for today, and I will be back next time to answer more questions.